everyone, it's Judy. In this video, we're gonna draw this portrait of Zendaya together step by step so you can actually watch the video and draw with me at the same time from scratch till the end. This is a combination of 3 videos. I already posted them on my YouTube channel, so I just combined them all into one video so you'll get everything you need in this video. So draw with me. Here's all the art supplies I'll be using. Feel free to take a screenshot as a reference, but as I'm using them, I'm gonna tell you how you can replace each one of them in case you don't have it, so don't worry about that. This is my black pencil. It's kind of like charcoal but smoother and easier to handle. A normal mechanical pencil for sketching and small details. A micron pen, but this is optional. A mono zero eraser for details. A white jelly roll pen for the strongest highlights, blending stubs, or you can also use Q-tips, flat brushes, different sizes for blending and for applying powder, and this big one is for cleaning the paper. Graphite powder, I made it myself from a normal HP pencil, and you can do it too for shading, and this kneaded eraser for some details. Now grab a pencil and draw with me. We're gonna start with dividing the face. I like to start by splitting the face in half and then divide it into thirds. In the standard face structure, the distance between your hairline and the eyebrows should be equal to the distance between the eyebrows and the nose and equal to the distance between the nose and the chin. We will be using these lines as guidelines to know where to put our features. And about what I'm doing with red, I'm gonna explain it later, but these are just measurements I'm gonna be doing. And if you want the reference picture, you can find the link in the description box. It'll take you to Pinterest and you can download it in high quality. This is the sketch pad I use. It's nothing special, it's not a known brand, but I don't care about that. I care about the paper itself. It's thick but has a smooth surface, and that is what I want. As you can see, I already sketched the first 2 lines, and when I'm drawing a reference picture that is symmetrical or the person is looking directly at the camera, I like to start with the nose because it's obviously in the center of the drawing or the face, and when I draw the nose first, everything else would fall into place around it because now I can tell where my portrait will be and I can put it wherever I want. Zendaya is really beautiful. She has sharp features and she is really easy to draw, so try to have fun with it as much as you can. Normally, after I draw the nose, I like to draw the eyebrows because now I can tell where to draw the second guideline and draw the rest. So each third is 4 centimeters. For me, this is only the case for me because I'm drawing A4, but it shouldn't be the case for you. It depends on the size you're drawing, so it doesn't matter. Just make sure all the thirds are equal. So now I'm working a little more on the eyebrow, but I'm measuring that. What am I measuring? Remember the red dots? This is the length of the eyebrow. Now I know where it ends, but how did I know that? My point of drawing this is to be 100% accurate. This is optional, of course, but I really like to be, as I said before, 100% accurate. So what I do is I measure everything. I measure distances, I measure lengths, widths, I measure everything to get it right. And these guidelines that I initially drew helped me a lot as a reference to measure from this guideline to the point I want to draw. So I basically do math. I believe in numbers. So I measure the reference on my phone with a ruler and then I just transfer it to the paper. If I want it bigger, I multiply the distance by 2 and draw it bigger. If I want it smaller, I can divide it. And if I want it the same, I can just zoom in the picture on my phone to match my drawing. And yeah, that's it. As you saw what I measured right now, I pointed where the eye started. 1 point is enough for me to know how to draw the rest, but I really now want to know where it ends. So I measured from that point I initially drew to the end of the eye. And now I can just simply complete sketching the eye knowing that I did it 100% correctly. But of course you don't have to measure everything. There are a lot of things that you can just look at it and tell the distance of it or how you can draw it or where. But if you don't feel like you're there yet, you can literally measure everything, even the eyelashes. It just depends on your level, on your practice, and of course everything gets better with practicing. You know, I'm not a big fan of sketching the outlines. For me, I really enjoy shading and I really want to just finish sketching the outlines as fast as I can. So whatever method you're using to sketch the outlines, it's okay, it doesn't matter. The beauty of drawing to me is shading. I don't know about you, maybe you do enjoy sketching the outlines, I don't know. But I actually switched to the grid method because it's faster than freehand sketching. And if you want to draw this portrait with us but you don't feel like you're gonna get it right using this method, you can watch the previous video I posted. I talked about the grid method and everything you need to know about it, so you can go there, sketch the outlines using the grid method and come back to this video for shading. Notice how I'm sketching very gently because I make a lot of mistakes when I draw the outlines, and that is completely normal. You're just drawing an initial sketch and it's okay to make mistakes, but you're gonna make sure that you can erase these mistakes. So yeah, be gentle with it. And I'm using a mechanical pencil, but of course you don't have to sketch using a mechanical pencil. Any HB or H pencil is good for sketching. I don't know if you noticed, but I kind of draw tiny lines when I sketch. So one tiny line after another and I just connect them together, but I do connect them together. I see a lot of artists that sketch these initial lines, but they're not like connecting these lines properly. You have to make a continuous line. Try to keep your sketch as clean as possible. If you mess up, don't just draw over it. Try to erase it and draw it again, because if you end up with a messy sketch, you're gonna make the paper first of all dirty, and this will affect the shading, will be visible after you shade over it. So just try to keep your paper as clean as possible, and your lines should be as clean as possible for better shading. Now this is optional, but I did draw another guideline to help me with the face shape. Also 4 centimeters apart, so I ended up with a big square. Of course, this is how I like to sketch it. You can't have a wrong or a right way to do so, it's up to you. But I just thought about sharing mine, because a lot of you requested it. Keep in mind that the lines you're drawing right now could change after you shade, because this shading will actually lead you to better proportions sometimes. That's why I sometimes draw each part individually. For example, I sketch an eye and then shade it and then move to the other eye, which is just a different technique that I like to use. And now I'm drawing the first guideline. I didn't draw it at the beginning, but this is how it helped me. Look at that. Now I know that her hairline is below this guideline we initially drew. So we can know that Zendaya is not perfect after all. Now about the hair. I want to tell you something about the hair. You don't have to exactly follow what you're seeing in the reference picture, because it's hair. It changes. Maybe you want to add more volume. Maybe you want to do whatever you want, because The hair doesn't change the way she looks, and you can control that, so go ahead and do whatever you like. So don't worry about it, don't overthink it, just draw the hair you want to draw. It doesn't affect the portrait, and that's what's important here. Just do whatever you want. And this also applies on the neck, the ears, the eyelashes, and the outfit, because nobody will look at the neck and be like, yeah, I recognize that neck, it's Zendaya's. No, nobody can tell. Of course you have to draw a decent ear or a decent neck, but you don't have to draw it exactly as you see it in the reference, because it doesn't affect the way she looks. Again, don't overthink these stuff. Now the shading. The first thing about shading with powder is you have to be so patient with it. So on a different piece of paper, you're gonna take the powder and tap it. Get rid of all the excess powder because you will not be able to erase it easily. I'm gonna explain shading the second eye with you in detail, and you can shade it with me at the same time, but the explanation applies on both. So after you draw the second eye with me, come back to this one and draw it by yourself using the reference. So I'm just starting with my mechanical pencil, and I'm going over my sketch, over the dark lines just to define them more. Now start sketching the tiny details like the eyelashes, just roughly. You don't have to be 100% accurate because you will shade and they will disappear. And now with my black pencil, I'm gently going over the crease line. And if you don't have this black pencil or a charcoal pencil, you can use any pencil you have. Just pick the darkest shade you have. It could be 2B, 3B, up to 14B. The darkest one you have, you can use it. Go over this line and then blend. Now with graphite powder, as I told you before, leave the excess. Keep doing that until when you tap the brush, it doesn't leave any powder behind. So now, so gently and very lightly shade. To get realistic and smooth shading, you have to build up layers, which is the whole idea of shading anything, especially if it's skin. You have to build up layers. How? Start light and darken as you go. You can't go dark from the beginning. First of all, you're gonna have to make a base layer and then add layers over that until you reach the shade you want. And that doesn't only apply on shading with powder. Even if you're using a normal pencil for shading, you should do the same thing. Actually, shading with powder will give you smoother results. And you don't have to use dark shades of pencils like 9B or 8B or whatever, because the powder will compensate for that. Because all you're doing is building up layers until you reach the shade you want. And I know it's time consuming because you're building a layer after a layer, but it's really worth it. Notice how my hand is moving. It's a circular motion. Always move your brush so gently in a circular motion to have this smooth look and to prevent smudges. And I know a lot of you struggle with smudges, and yes, it could be messy, but if you leave the excess as I showed you, and if you place a paper below your hand, you won't have any smudges. Now again with my black pencil, I'm going over her eyeliner. And again, you can do that with any pencil, either a dark pencil or even a HB pencil, but you can control your hand pressure. And again, blending with a brush. The brushes I'm using are actually either makeup brushes or brushes for nail art. These are not for drawing, but the important thing that they are flat. I got them from AliExpress. They're cheap and they are really good, so that's what's important. So as you can see, I'm repeating the process again. I'm building up layers, right? So when my hand leaves the frame, I'm actually dipping the brush in the powder, leaving the excess, and going over this process again. Now, this is also optional. You can do that with any pencil, but this should be the darkest place in the eye. And here I'm blending with a brush, as you can see, but I'm taking the shadows out because I want to shade the whole thing. But I'm not adding any extra powder. I'm just using the color that is already there. And as you can see, whenever I finish something, I just go over it with a brush again to make sure that everything is blended correctly, because the more you blend, the more the results will come out realistic and smooth. And keep in mind that you don't have to use brush for blending, you can use just a Q-tip. And of course, you don't have to use powder, you can use a normal pencil. If you find using powder kind of overwhelming, that's fine. I just recently started using powder. Now I like it more, but I will admit that the idea of it was scary at the beginning, but now when I'm used to it, I find it much easier and more fun actually to shade with. Because lately I noticed that when I'm drawing young people who have clear skin, I'm not getting that smoothness that I wanted. So when I actually tried the powder, I was impressed and decided to never go back to pencils. However, after I shade whatever I want to shade, this mechanical pencil is very helpful for details. As you can see, I add all the details after I am done shading, or after I put my base layer. I like to add these little details with my mechanical pencil. This is a normal HB pencil. It's nothing much, but I really use it a lot. This is the only pencil I use, because after I shade anything, even if it's the skin, I draw skin pores with it. If it's the lips, I draw the details. Anything, as you can see here, I'm drawing skin pores on the eyelid and then blend it with a brush. And again, of course, you can use any normal HB pencil, but make sure that it is sharp because you want to get these tiny details. Now I'm just sketching the eyelashes just to know where to put them, using my pencil because I don't want to make mistakes with my black pencil. You might notice that in the reference there are heavy shadows below the eyelashes because of the lighting, but I chose not to draw that. Now with my kneaded eraser, I'm just lifting a tone of the graphite off of the eyelid and just adding a few details wherever I feel like it's necessary. I love that the kneaded eraser is highly available and it's really cheap, so you can get it easily from anywhere. Now I'm going over my rough sketch of eyelashes with my black pencil. You can do that with your darkest shade of pencil and make sure that it's sharp. And as I said before, eyelashes don't have to be perfect. You don't have to follow exactly what you're seeing in the reference picture because they're like hair, they change, and you're not exactly drawing an eye, so the focus isn't about the eyes, isn't about the eyelashes, so it's okay, it's a portrait. You can just be free with drawing the eyelashes. Now I'm blending the eyelashes with a brush, but here you're gonna have to be extra gentle with it because it can be easily ruined. And here I messed up big time because I forgot to leave the excess, but with my kneaded eraser I can just tap it and lift this graphite that I accidentally added. But don't erase it, just tap it, even if it's just a normal eraser. For the bottom lashes, I didn't even sketch them with a pencil because they're so easy to draw. They are thin, They should be thinner than the upper lashes. So just have fun with them. They're really fun to draw. And again, blending with a brush, but the different thing here is that you should draw shadows below them. So with a HB pencil, just go below them, draw tiny eyelashes, and they're gonna be like shadows. And finally, I'm going over them with a micron pen, but this is completely optional. I don't always do this. I actually rarely do this, but it depends on the reference. So it's up to you, either is fine. But use it only if you already use a charcoal or a black pencil. Now adding some highlights with the Mono Zero eraser and blending after it. And now drawing the eyebrows. I just went ahead with my black pencil at the end of the eyebrow because it is darker than the beginning, so I'm not even touching the beginning of the eyebrow, and I'm blending what I've drawn, just messy hairs. It's not really organized. I'm not really looking at the reference much. I'm just following the general direction of the hairs, and when my hand is leaving the frame, I'm actually adding powder over this charcoal or black pencil. And because my camera stopped, I'm showing this eyebrow. So for the beginning of the eyebrow, I'm just doing it with my mechanical pencil. I'm drawing hair by hair and then adding powder to fill it in. Don't color it in with your pencil. Draw tiny hairs, fill it in with powder, and then draw tiny hairs again. And finally, add highlights. You know, for me, getting the eyes right is the most important thing of drawing a portrait, because if I got a person's look correctly, you will easily recognize them by only their eyes. Adding highlights with my Mono Zero eraser. Of course, I'm not following exactly what I'm seeing in the reference because the eyebrows could change again. You don't have to make them 100% perfect. It's fine. Just do what feels right. Now finally, for the strongest highlights, I'm adding them with my white General pen. This pen is really amazing and I advise you to invest in one because it gives you this dramatic highlights that you will need in every drawing. Now if you feel like you are messy, you can get the drawing dirty, don't add the highlights with the General pen just yet. Finish the whole drawing, and when you finish, just add it as final touches, because if you get graphite over it again, it will not be pretty. It will turn into gray. So if you feel like you can smudge the paper again, just don't draw it now. When you finish the whole portrait, drawing at the end. And with a pencil and a brush, I'm turning down this strong highlight in some places because I don't need it that much in every place. Now let's move to shading the nose. Shading the nose will mainly be powder. I'm gonna go with that graphite powder and that brush over and over again until I reach the shade I want. You're really gonna have to be patient with it because you will get such smooth results, and her nose is really smooth and doesn't have a lot of detail, but it has some great shadows. So I'm gonna do all of that with only brush, and at the end I'm just gonna define the lines with my charcoal pencil or black pencil, or you can just use a pencil of course, but you're gonna have to bear with me because this might take a while and you're gonna have to be patient. And also don't forget that you always have to move the brush in a circular motion as I showed you before, of course very gently and lightly. And don't forget to leave the excess. Make sure that you're not carrying too much powder in the brush. And as you can see, I'm defining the nose with the powder itself. I'm looking at my reference and noticing where the dark places are and where the light places are. And I'm defining that with a brush. Now with my charcoal pencil, very gently and lightly noticing where the darkest lines are and just going over them and then blending. Now after building up all these layers and reaching the shade I wanted, I'm adding details with a mechanical pencil or a sharp pencil, just in a circular motion to give it some skin pores to make it look more realistic. And again, blending. I can't say this enough. Blending is very important after each step. And finally, I'm lifting the graphite, or I'm adding highlights with my kneaded eraser by just tapping it where I want the highlights to be. And for stronger highlights, I'm using my Mono Zero eraser. And a little tip that I used to do before having this one, I used to use the eraser at the tip of your pencil. If it's a new pencil, there's a new eraser there, so you can use that as a Mono Zero eraser actually. Finally, the lips. I'm just going over some lines to define them more. Actually, her lips are so easy to draw because there's lipstick, and lipstick actually makes it a whole lot easier than drawing detailed lips. So with a big brush, I'm just adding graphite powder on the whole thing as a base layer. And with a small brush, I'm just gonna add graphite powder on the darkest areas in the lips as I see it in the reference, and you're gonna notice that in a minute. So see what I'm doing here, I'm not just shading some areas darker than others randomly, I'm just following what I'm seeing in the reference. Now the middle lines is always the darkest ones, so I like to darken it with a black pencil. So this is only powder so far except for the middle line. And don't forget again the circular motion. Be gentle, build up layers, be patient. As I said before, there's lipstick, so there are a lot of details that are not visible here. For example, the outlines are sharp. Normally with lips, the outlines are blended with the skin. They're not that sharp, but here I'm drawing lipstick basically. I'm not drawing natural lips, so that's why they're so much easier to draw. And again, finally, I'm adding some details with the mechanical pencil. You know the drill by now. Add details, blend, finally add highlights, blend again, and that is it. Here, the highlights in the reference are much stronger than what I'm drawing right now, and I should be doing that with a jelly roll pen, but I'm really afraid I might smudge it because the lips are dark. So I'm gonna leave it till the end, so you're gonna see that in the third video when I'm finishing up the drawing. I'm gonna add these highlights for the lips with a jelly roll pen, but at the end. Hello everyone, it's Judy. In today's video, we're gonna shade Zendaya's face, neck, ears, and earrings. We're gonna focus on shading using graphite powder, but first let's talk about the art supplies I'll be using. In this video, we're not gonna be using a lot of art supplies, but if you're interested in learning more about them, you can check the last video I posted where I talked about each one of them and explained it more. As I said before, we're going to be focusing on graphite powder, so I'm going to show you how you can make it yourself. All you're going to need is a normal HB pencil, the brand isn't important, whatever works for you, and a cutter. There's a million ways of making graphite powder, but this is what I do usually because I find it satisfying, I find it therapeutic in a way. I don't know about you, but this is what I do. You can just sharpen your pencil and that will leave some powder. I smooth it out with sandpaper, that leaves powder, and I like to shave it with this cutter, as you can see, and then I store it in a jar. And you don't have to only use one pencil. I usually make a mixture of HB, H, and B pencils. Now the way you apply the powder is very important because you want to keep your drawing as clean as possible and you want to avoid smudges. So take the powder with your brush and tap it until you get rid of all the excess powder. Now on your paper, you're gonna make sure that you are so gentle with it. You're gonna have to move your hand in a circular motion so lightly on the paper, don't press too hard, and you're gonna have to build up layers. So your first layer should be so light you're gonna hardly even see it. And when you dip your brush to take extra powder, don't forget to tap it again to leave the excess. As you can see, I like to keep the powder on an extra paper, but of course we're not gonna need all this powder. When I'm done, I just put the powder back in the jar. Okay, so I'm gonna start with adding my first layer. It's gonna be an even layer. It's gonna be very light on the whole face. I'm not gonna even look at the reference. I'm just gonna apply the powder on the whole face because I want to break the whiteness of the paper. In case you don't know me, I actually did draw her face features on YouTube step by step. In the previous video I posted, you can check it out and draw her with us. And I'll leave the link of the reference picture in the description box so you can have it in high quality. And now that I have finished my even layer, I'm gonna add another layer, but this time I'm gonna be looking at the reference picture and noticing where are the shadows. I'm gonna notice where the areas that have heavier shadows than others and just follow that. So I'm using a big brush to define her cheekbones more, and I also noticed that her dimples are visible a bit, so I'm doing that also with my brush. And you're gonna feel that it's not 100% accurate, and that's correct because it's a big brush, and we're gonna go over that again with a smaller brush to make it more detailed. But as I said before, I'm gonna have to build up layers, so it doesn't make sense to have details on the second layer. You probably guessed it by now, but this is gonna take a lot of time and patience, but the results are worth it. And now that I've reached the shade I want, after many layers, I'm gonna start adding the details with my small brush. If you add too much powder in one place, you're just gonna need your kneaded eraser, tap it, and it will be gone. Don't erase it with a normal eraser. Even if you don't have a kneaded eraser, take your normal eraser and tap it. Be so gentle with it because you don't want to erase the layers you've been building. Now, why do I think that shading with powder is more professional? And this is just my personal opinion. Because I've tried shading with a normal pencil and I've tried shading with powder, and I like this one better, even though it's harder, it's messier, and it's more time consuming. So in my experience, I found that shading with powder gives more realistic and smoother results. Especially when I draw young people that have clear skin. Whenever I tried to shade that with a normal pencil, I didn't get the smooth skin I wanted. But when I tried shading with powder, I was genuinely surprised by how realistic that was. And the first drawing I tried using powder was Harry Styles. And it's one of my favorite drawings now because it's insanely realistic, and you can see it on my Instagram and judge for yourself. Even though I didn't use charcoal back then, I only used pencil, but it is one of my favorite drawings of all times. Okay, let's go back to Zendaya. As you saw, I added details using a mechanical pencil and then highlights with a mono zero eraser, just some skin pores when I felt needed according to the reference picture, and blended with a brush. And now I'm defining her face more with a charcoal or a black pencil, whatever you have. You can also use the darkest pencil you have, doesn't matter, just control your hand pressure. Of course, this is not the case for every portrait, but in ours there are heavy shadows on her neck below her face, so that's what we're doing. And I'm taking the shadows down, I'm blending the line and I'm taking the shadows down because I don't want to affect her face with these heavy shadows. I'm gonna keep it light shaded and I'm gonna take the shadows down. And as you can see, I went off her neck, but this is her hair, so I'm gonna shade that later. It's also gonna be dark, so it's okay, but this is not the case for every portrait, it depends on your reference. And there are very delicate highlights on her chin. I'm doing these with the mono zero eraser because it's tiny, but you can also shape your kneaded eraser and use that. It's gonna give the same effect. And you can also use the tiny eraser on the tip of your pencil. And now for the neck, we're gonna repeat the same process. I'm just defining the lines with my mechanical pencil just to know where the shadows are, just a sketch. And now I'm applying the first layer of powder, but here I didn't start with an even layer on the whole thing because her neck is lighter than the face and I didn't feel that I needed to do that. You may have noticed, but I sometimes have some extra powder on the paper and I brush it off, and this is very important. Do not use your hand to clean it or else you'll leave smudges. Now, because this is relatively a large area, you can actually use a tissue to blend, but you don't add extra powder with the tissue, you just blend what you already have. Now I'm just redefining where the darkest areas are with my mechanical pencil and shading that again. One of the biggest mistakes a lot of artists do is that they define the outer lines of anything more than the shadows, and that is true, but you are doing it wrong. You don't make it look like a separate line, you have to blend it in with your shadows. And how you're gonna do that with a pencil, move it in a circular motion, try to blend this outer line with your shadows and blend with a Q-tip or a blending stump. Just make it look one, blended. Don't make the outer line a separate line, because that's not correct. If you look at your hand, you won't see the outer line darker than the color of your hand. So you don't do that with the face, you don't do that with the neck, you don't do that with anything you draw. As I said before, there are heavy shadows below her face, so I'm just building up these shadows accordingly. And I didn't feel like I needed to show what I did for her outfit because I just colored it in. I didn't do anything special, I just used my black pencil, colored it in, and just blended it fully black. And one other thing, I said that in the previous video, but when you draw the neck, you don't have to follow exactly what you're seeing in the reference picture because it's not the main focus of the portrait. Nobody will look at the neck and be like, yes, I recognize this neck. No, don't worry about it, you don't have to be 100% accurate. And that also applies on her ears. You don't also have to be 100% accurate because they're also not the main focus. But in this case, her ears are mostly covered with hair, so it might be easier for you to draw the hair first, but I needed to leave the hair to a separate video. But it's up to you, you can draw it now, you can draw it later, but you're gonna see me draw some hairs above it or some heavy shadows, and that is just because of the hair. Normally ears are not that dark, but it depends on the reference. And now for the earrings. FYI, drawing jewelry is not easy. I personally find it very challenging because there are heavy shadows and heavy highlights at the same time, and sometimes you're gonna find some reflections. So it's not easy to show it all in such a small object at the same time. So it's up to you. You can skip it, you can just complete finishing her ear, or you can try to draw it. I did, but since they're so small, I didn't really pay much attention to them. I tried my best, but I didn't care much for them. So it's up to you. So I started by shading them all in, but defining the outer lines more because I knew I needed to add highlights in the middle, and I'm gonna do that with my Mono Zero Eraser as I'm seeing in the reference. Now I'm shading the middle that is holding the barrels with my black pencil because, as I said before, there are heavy shadows and I needed to show that with my charcoal pencil. And I'm lightly going over her cheeks with my mechanical pencil just because I felt that her cheeks needed more shading. Now when it comes to drawing jewelry, a wide general pen is really a game changer because it will give you that strong highlight that you want, that strong reflection. But in case you don't have it, you don't have to worry about it because it's just an earring. You don't have to get it 100% right. And I have spent years without having a wide general pen because I couldn't find it anywhere until I ordered it from Amazon. It's not really available everywhere and you might not find it where you live, but if you do, it will be a game changer for you. But if you don't feel bad. And now I'm just turning down the strong whiteness of the general pen with my mechanical pencil. Now that's her hair. I just felt compelled to draw it because it felt silly not to, but this is just her hair. Now the same explanation applies on the second ear, except that it is shaded more than the other one because it has more hair on it. So just look at the reference and try to copy what you see, but the general concept is the same. And I also added some shadows on her face because I felt that I needed to, but that is not necessarily the case for you. Just look at your drawing and do what feels right. And if you're gonna use the general pen, I advise you to leave it till the last step, even after you draw the hair, because you might smudge it and it will turn gray. So you can just skip that until you finish the drawing and add it as final touches. Finally, I'm going over the whole face with my kneaded eraser, just dabbing it where I feel that I need to, just as final touches. I just love adding these final touches. And yeah, that's it. I hope you give power. Hey y'all, it's Rudy. In today's video, we're gonna draw Zendaya's hair together, and this will be the last video of this series. And in case you have no idea what I'm talking about, I actually did draw this portrait of Zendaya here on YouTube step by step. So if you're interested in learning how to draw a full portrait from scratch, you can check the previous videos I posted. And we're gonna use different techniques for each part of her hair, even though the general idea is the same, but with slight differences, so you can choose which method is best for you. So don't worry about art supplies. We might use one art tool in one method but not use it in another. But here's everything I'll be using. This is honestly one of the most important things I'll be using, and I'll use it in every part of her hair. This is the dotting tool used in nail art. It's not for drawing, I just picked it up and used it. Just find anything pointy but not too sharp, because you don't want to rip the paper, and you can use it. You can also use a dry pen because it's pointy and not too sharp, and later we'll see how this is helpful for drawing hair. I'm on a zero eraser. I'll be also using this a lot, and in case you don't have it, you can use any small eraser you have, but this is really good for the highlights. Or you can use the kneaded eraser, and we'll talk about that later. Graphite powder, but we won't use that in every method. Black pencils or charcoal pencils, but in case you don't want to draw with charcoal, you can pick your darkest shade of graphite pencil and draw with it. And for blending, of course, I'll be using brushes and blending subs, or you can also use Q-tips and a normal mechanical pencil for sketching. Now, how are we gonna look at it? How to look at your reference is a very important thing, and the easiest thing I do is dividing the hair into hair strands and just dealing with each one individually, which makes it so much easier to sketch it later. So there is no right or wrong here. It's up to you. It's about the way you see it. So I like to divide them into highlights and shadows because I think these are the most obvious of the hair, and later I just sketch that on my paper with my mechanical pencil. Now, can you see the effects of my weird tool? I'm engraving the paper. I'm creating these lines over the highlights with this tool because I want to create different levels for the paper. Constantly look at your reference as a guide and engrave lines accordingly. And now just start shading over it. I like to start with the darkest areas. With my black pencil, I just fill it in and then blend with a brush. Be careful though, when you work close to the neck or face, you don't want them to get dirty, so make sure your pencil is sharp. And as I said before, you can use the darkest shade of graphite pencil you have and do the same thing. Now I filled the area with graphite powder, just a thin base layer, but you can skip that if you're using charcoal. However, if you're using graphite, it's better to add a base layer first. So I'm not gonna be doing that for the rest of her hair because obviously I'm using charcoal, but I showed it here for clarification. And notice how I'm moving my hand? Yes, I'm filling it in, but moving my hand with the hair direction. So I'm kind of drawing hair by hair. And when blending, I'm taking the shadows in the unshaded areas, and that's fine because everything will get eventually shaded. And now I'm lightly shading the highlighted areas with my charcoal pencil and blending that. Now I think you get why we used the pointy tool. It easily created these natural highlights, but we still have to create more. So using the mono zero eraser or the tiny sharp eraser at the tip of your pencil, keep adding highlights until you're satisfied with the results. Randomly, you don't have to follow exactly what you're seeing in the reference, but keep it in mind. Or you can shape your kneaded eraser to be sharp and do the same thing. Erasing charcoal to make highlights is not very easy, so the engraved lines helped us doing that. But I didn't used to do that when I shaded with graphite before. You still can, but it's not necessary, because it's easy to control graphite, but charcoal could literally get everywhere. Adjust it to your liking and move to another area. And yes, I'm saying areas because it's easier to divide the hair into areas and work on each one of them, finish it, and move to another one. Of course, it's up to you. Some people like to treat the whole thing as one and work it all at the same time. But for me, I easily get distracted. I don't want to be all over the place, so I focus on one thing at a time. And again, be extra careful when working close to the skin. In case you get it dirty, just tap the area with the kneaded eraser until you lift the charcoal up. As you can see, I repeated the same process. Engraved the lines with the pointy tool, shaded the darkest areas, and now we're going to talk about a different method you can do for the highlights. This is a highlighted strand of hair, and I'm shading it with graphite powder, not charcoal. No matter how much powder you add, it'll still be lighter than the charcoal. Then you can add few details with a charcoal pencil, but be careful. You can only use graphite powder. You can't use a normal pencil and shade with it, because if you get it on top of the charcoal, it'll leave a shine. But it's fine if you get graphite powder over the charcoal. In case you don't know how to use graphite powder, I explained everything you need to know about it in the previous video I posted, and I'm gonna link it here so you can check it out. But I like my old method better, where I'm taking the shadows of the charcoal itself into the unshaded areas and then lightly adding random lines with my black pencil. And notice how I'm drawing light hairs with my mechanical pencil, but only over the highlighted areas that already have powder on it. I never shaded these areas with a black pencil, so I can add a normal pencil on it, just to add a few details in the highlighted areas. Now I'm gonna shade the background, just to show you how a dark background could add a pretty effect to the hair. When shading close to the body, I use a normal pencil and a blending stump just to make sure her skin is kept clean. Otherwise, I just go over it with graphite powder using this big makeup brush, and I keep adding layers until I reach the shade I want. And now with a Mono Zero eraser, or you can actually use a kneaded eraser for this one, I just went ahead and added these dramatic white hairs. And if you look at the reference, you might not see them because it's just an addition from me. I just feel that they add value to the portrait, and I mean, it's my drawing, so I'm free to do my thing, right? You might wonder why I jumped to the other side of her head, and I was wondering too, believe me. I don't know what possessed me into doing that, and I wanted to put this part first for the video to be more organized, but when I started editing, I thought, why not show you how random you can be while drawing? It's okay to not always be perfect. I'm a moody person and I just do what I'm in the mood for. So yes, I can jump to the other side of her head. I sometimes pick the least common place to start a portrait and I start my portrait with it. You don't have to follow what you see others do. Do what feels right for you in that moment. Don't plan anything because you won't feel that freedom of creating something you love. And I want to add something when engraving the paper. Always start with it. Make it your first step when drawing hair. And make sure it's a clean paper. Here I forgot to do that and I added graphite powder first, so I had to erase it to engrave the paper first. Okay, now the third trick you can use. If you are scared to shade directly with charcoal, and believe me, I understand that, and especially in sensitive areas like the middle part or the hairline, you can start with a light sketch using a normal pencil just as your guide to using charcoal. Okay, drawing the middle part. We're gonna ignore it exists, really. Just draw tiny lines, make sure you're following the reference for the hair's directions, and leave the middle area its space. We're gonna come back to it later. If you pay attention, I always rotate the Mono Zero eraser when using it, because it gets dirty just by one swipe. So I rotate it to use all the sides and then I clean it on a clean paper to get rid of all that charcoal or graphite and then use it again. As you can see, I shaded with charcoal again and added highlights again. It's okay to repeat this process as many times as you want until you're satisfied with it. And now for the hairline. You need to be so careful with it because if you mess up here, it'll taint the face. So start shading so lightly, whether with charcoal or graphite, whatever you're using, it requires patience here. And we want to make the hair as if it's blended with the face, so we're drawing hairline obviously, so we're gonna use a mechanical pencil for that because it's sharp and light. Make your starting point the hair, not the face. Draw tiny lines and ease it up as you're reaching the face. Just make sure it's sharp and lighter than what you shaded the hair with. And don't forget to draw these tiny cute baby hairs that Zendaya has. So obviously this is not the case for every portrait you draw. And then add highlights with a Mono Zero eraser using the same technique. Your starting point is the hair. Just draw tiny lines with that eraser and ease it up as you reach the face. Now there's another thing you can do. You can add graphite powder on the top of your first layer of charcoal, especially in the highlighted areas. But how is that useful? It makes us use less charcoal basically, and maybe we can control our shadows better and eventually make highlights easier. I normally keep adding charcoal to my liking, right? Here I didn't need to do that. I just added one layer, then completed with powder, and finally added highlights. But of course, this only works with the strongly highlighted areas. But if you want to go darker, graphite won't give you a strong effect over the charcoal. And remember, in order to mix between charcoal and graphite, you can only use powder. You can't use a normal graphite pencil and shade over the charcoal, or else you will leave a shine. This is from her back hair. It doesn't have much highlights and doesn't require a lot of attention really. So just draw it to get it out of the way. And I like to add very light highlights in the hair in the dark areas even if I don't see it in the reference, because maybe the lighting of that picture erased them. But it's hair, I can always show more details, so I add highlights and then blend them with a brush. And that is exactly why drawing hair is so much fun. You can be free drawing it. You can adjust it as you wish or even change it to your liking. You don't have to follow the reference, just maybe follow the general idea of it. Or maybe you can change it completely and draw your own hairstyle. It's literally up to you. It's not a part of the face, so it doesn't play a big role in the person's features, which is what's important, right? So you can have fun with it. And let me tell you, it could be really tiring and it could take the longest, but it's definitely the part where you can draw with the most freedom. Now I want to talk about how important blending is. If you're aiming for realism, you should get used to blending and going over the same area over and over again until you smooth it out. After everything you do, blend. Whether you're shading, adding highlights, blending, just blend one more time. And I recommend using brushes. I found them the best tools for getting smooth results. I like using different sizes of flat brushes, and I mostly move my hand in a circular motion, but in this case I'm also following the direction of the hair. I got these brushes from AliExpress for like $2. These are not for drawing, these are for nail art, but it doesn't really matter what kind of brush you use, just make sure it's kinda smooth to make it easier to blend, and that's it. But of course, you can also use tissues for such a large area, Q-tips or blending stumps for the smaller areas. And I'm sure you noticed that I always place a paper below my hand when drawing. I'm left-handed and I smudge the paper when writing, so what do you think I do when drawing and with charcoal? But even if you are right-handed, you should too always place a paper or a tissue below your hand, because your hand is constantly releasing oils and you don't want those on your drawing because they will leave smudges that are impossible to remove, trust me. And I know some people hate not being able to see their drawing, so you can actually use tracing paper. That way you can see your drawing, so issue solved. Her hair alone took me around 4 hours to finish, a total of 3 days. Let me know how long it took you in the comments. And I want to take the time and appreciate your support. It's really overwhelming. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you like my content and you're finding it useful. And since this series is over, let me know in the comments what kind of tutorials you want to see next. Now let's go back to the middle part. I did on the other side the same thing I did on the first one and left the middle part its space again, but shaded it with powder that is already on my brush from blending the hair, and now I want to draw the roots. So again, here my starting point is the hair, and I ease up the lines as I go along the middle part, which also applies on the hairline as we mentioned before. But here, the Mono Zero Eraser is actually a game changer. It'll help me break that straight line I created and turn it into hairs. But now, my starting point is the roots and I ease up the lines as I reach the hair. It's reversed now. But according to the reference, the middle part is wider at the top of her head and it gets smaller and smaller as you go. So you start by adding highlights as lines and end up adding just dots. And as I said before, you can definitely use the kneaded eraser for highlights. You can shape it the way you want. It's really good for that. And then when you finish adding highlights with a mechanical pencil, just draw lighter hairs to make it look more blended with the head. And don't forget to add the magical final touches. Always add random hairs anywhere you like, just to break the outer line of the hair to make it look more realistic. Maybe add highlights that might have disappeared because you smudged the paper. So just do your thing, finish it off. When you're happy with it, you will have the finished product. And that's pretty much it, guys. Don't forget to sign your artwork, and to make sure it's kept safe, I spray it with a fixative. The brand isn't important, just make sure that it's for charcoal or pencils and you can use it. If you're drawing this portrait with me, first of all, I'm honored, and second, don't forget to post it on your Instagram account when you finish it. Tag me in it. It's Art by Judy, and we're gonna decide the date in my Instagram story, so make sure you follow me there and here and on TikTok. And yeah, that's it. That's enough, I think. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.